In the last section, we talked about how to multiply a monomial by a monomial. We multiply the coefficients, the number parts, and we multiply the variable parts. We also talked about how to multiply a monomial by a polynomial. We use the distributive or the handshake rule, where we multiply each term by that monomial. In this section, we're going to step it up. We're going to talk about a binomial times a binomial. So how do those generally look like? Remember, binomial, like bicycle, has two terms, right? Two wheels, two terms. So a binomial times a binomial looks something like this. Okay, there's two terms in each bracket. Now, there are a few different methods for multiplying two binomials together. These are methods that are commonly taught by different teachers. So first we have the FOIL method. A lot of teachers like to use the FOIL method. If your teacher hasn't taught the FOIL method, feel free to move on to the next method. So how does the FOIL method work? FOIL is an acronym. F stands for first, O stands for outside, I stands for inside, L stands for last. Let's take a look at an example of how to apply this FOIL method. Now I'm going to first write out my FOIL, and I'm going to use different colors just to really highlight what we're doing. All right, let's start with F. F stands for first. Well, what is first? If you look at both of these brackets, they both have a first term. So that means I'm going to multiply the first terms together. So that's 3x times negative 2x. All right. Then what is O? O stands for outside. So if I look at my brackets, on the outside of my brackets, there are again two terms, the 3x and the negative 6, because they're on the outside. So now we have 3x times negative 6. All right, let's move on to I. I stands for inside. If you look at the brackets on the inside of the brackets, there are again two terms. There's a positive 1 and a negative 2x. So I'm going to multiply those together. And finally, L. L stands for last. So if I look at both of these brackets, they both have a last term. So that's a positive 1 times a negative 6. Now let's crunch them all up. 3 times negative 2, well, a positive and a negative, that makes a negative. X times x, well, they're both x to the power of 1, so if I add the exponents together, that's x to the power of 2. All right, from the O, I get 3 times negative 6, which is negative 18. X is by itself, so it's just going to be an x. The I get a plus 1 times a negative 2, that's a negative 2. X stays as itself. Then we have a positive 1 and a negative 6, that's negative 6. All right, so I finished multiplying all of them. Notice that I no longer have brackets. I just have 4 individual terms. There's one more step we have to do whenever we're multiplying binomials. We want to see if we can simplify, meaning group our like terms. Well, the first one here is a single x squared. There's no other x squared, so this one can't be simplified. Well, the next two terms, they're both x terms, x to the power of 1, so I can group them together. Negative 18x minus 2x. Well, think about temperature. Negative 18 degrees is kind of cold. I'm subtracting another 2 degrees, it gets even lower, so now I'm at minus 20x. And then this last term here is a constant, nothing I can do with it, I'm just going to write it out. So notice that multiplying these two binomials together, I ended up with a trinomial. And this is very, very common when it comes to multiplying binomials. All right, the FOIL method works, but I don't like to remember FOIL. What if I forget on a test and I get nervous? Well, it turns out that that distributive method, the handshake rule that we already used for multiplying monomials, works for multiplying binomials. And it's actually very powerful because not only does it work for multiplying binomials, later on you're going to see that it actually works for multiplying any polynomials together. So I highly, highly, highly recommend you knowing how to use this distributive method. Okay, so again, it's a handshake rule. What does that mean? Well, this person in the party wants to go meet everyone. So he's going to go shake hands with everyone else in the party. And then this person, same thing, wants to go meet everyone in the party. So he's going to go shake hands with everyone else in the party, and so on. All right? So essentially, the distributive method says that each term in the first bracket needs to go meet, meaning it needs to go multiply by every term in the second bracket. So let's take a look at how the distributive method works. So again, we have two binomials here. They're the same binomials as the last example. We are going to use the distributive property. So in bracket number 1, I have person number 1, 3x. Person number 1 wants to go meet everyone else in the party, okay, meaning in the other bracket. So first I'm going to have a 3x times a negative 2x because they have to meet. So that's 3x times negative 2x. Then this person wants to go and meet the second person in the party. So I'm going to have a 3x times a negative 6. Great, 3x is happy. He's like, oh, I met everyone else in the other party. I'm good now. Okay, now we move on to the next person, this positive 1. So positive 1 wants to go meet the negative 2x. And then positive 1 wants to go meet with the negative 6. All right, positive 1 met everyone. She's happy. So that's it. That's the distributive method. Of course, we have to simplify now. So multiplying the first two terms, 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. X times x, well, that's x to the power of 1 times x to the power of 1, that's x to the power of 2. Then we have a 3 times negative 6, which is negative 18, and the x stays by itself. Next up in the green terms, I have a positive 1 times a negative 2. Well, that's going to be a negative, so I don't need to write the plus. I can just write negative 2. And again, there's just a single x, no other x to multiply, so it's just an x. Finally, our last constant term, 1 times negative 6. Well, positive and a negative makes a negative, so this is negative 6. All right, again, we end up with the 4 terms, just like what we did when we did FOIL method. But now we have to group like terms. The first one is an x squared. There's no other x squared, so just copy it out. The second one and the third one, they're both x terms, so we can add or subtract the coefficients. So negative 18 minus 2 is negative 20, x. Common mistake. Sometimes students, when they subtract the x's and the x disappears. Don't do that. When you're grouping like terms, the variable part stays the same. And finally, we have a negative 6. And again, we see that multiplying these two binomials together, we get a trinomial.